Good morning, Ellie.
Good morning. Excuse me. Give it 1 minute, we'll get started.
Okay.
Is to start. Nothing wrong with that.
Tired. Okay.
Okay, yeah, let's get started. We've all got work to go to and things. Today's daf is daf pei hey. We are on the 2 dots, around 10 lines up from the bottom of pei dalet on the bet. We'll fall a little behind trying to get to the Mishnah today because the last daf is very short, so you can borrow against it.
Okay. Okay, the middle of the next. Yeah, I see it. Okay.
So because I feel bad because in the bulletin it said 8:15 today, but we're involved. So I sent out the email, did what we could do. In any event, the Mishnah said this is one of the most practical and controversial Gemaras in Shas that you and I get to figure out today, Hanan. So hopefully we come to the right answer. The Mishnah said a couple days ago, we were talking about being saving lives on Shabbat, right? And so the Mishnah said that if a mapolet fell, Mishnah of mapolet, which of course historic, relevant things like what happened in Florida.
Always relevant, yeah.
Safek husham, safek ein husham. You don't know if a person's there or not, right? Or continue the Mishnah, safek chai, safek mate. You don't know if they're alive or dead. Safek kuti, safek shol. You don't know if it's a Jew or a non-Jew. In any event, you continue and you dig, get heavy equipment, your machal Shabbat, to open up, to try to excavate in order to find survivors or people. And to continue the Mishnah, matzu chai, if you find the person alive, mifakrim, you dig them out, which sounds pretty redundant. Of course, that's what you're doing. And if you're matzu mate, says the Mishnah, yinichu, leave the body there till after Shabbat. Okay? So it says the Gemara, that's what we're going to learn that whole sugya today. It says the Gemara, well, before we get there, sorry, the Braita that we had yesterday said that if you have a fire in one chatzer, you can mechabin, you can put out the fire, mafsikin, you can put a barrier in front of the fire, even to prevent it from going somewhere else. This is where lamali, what's the chiddush of that?
But where are we?
Oh, sorry, 2 dots, 10 lines down from the bottom on pei dalet on the bet. Maybe 12 lines down. You got it?
Is Amar Rav Yosef?
Yeah, the words before that. Lamali.
Okay.
You got the beginning of the line. The second one on the line. Mechabinu mafsikin, it says. The 2 dots.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So Lamali, what's the chiddush of that? It says that even if the people who are threatened by the fire live in a different house, a different courtyard, but the fire's in a separate courtyard, but you're afraid that if you don't put it out, it will get larger and spread. You can put it out to prevent it from going. Meaning you don't have to worry about imminent fire exposure, but you're worried about the next level. There, you're allowed to put it out as well. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. That's where we are. You got that?
Mm-hmm.
Says Rav Yosef, name Rav Yehuda, name ultimately of Shmuel. Lo hochu b'pikuach hanefesh acharov. When you deal with Pikuach Nefesh, you don't go after majority. Usually we always go after Rov. We assume that, if you have a suffix about a situation, you can go with the majority and establish a fact. In Pikuach Nefesh, that's not the case. You don't go with the majority, meaning you have to worry even for a minority. It says, what's the case? Let's say you have a fire or you have a house that collapses and you have 9 Jews and 1 Kuti, and there's one person stuck in the house, right? They excavated 9 people. We don't know their names. There's 1 left. But the majority of people who lived there were Jewish. So you assume they're Jewish and you do what you would do for a Jew. Shabbat, right? Says, well, that's not a Chiddush. Ruba Yisrael, they're mostly Jews. Inami, or even in a case where it's Palga, right? Let's say there's 10 people in the house. 5 are Jewish, 5 are not Jewish. Again, all the assumption here is that you do Mechalel Shabbat for a Jew, but not for a non-Jew. But you don't know. And then the house collapses, 1 person is trapped inside. Who's this 1 person? So it's half and half. So if it's Palga, then you say Safek Nefashot. Like, yeah, that's a Safek. That's exact 50%. What's the Chedesh? Let's say there are 9 non-Jews, and 1 Jew who live in this house. The house collapses, and there's 1 person stuck inside. Maybe. Right? So the question is that person one of the non-Jews, in which case you're not Machal Shabbat, you wait till after Shabbat, or is it the Jewish participant, the Jewish inhabitant? So that's also Pshita, because Hanami Pshita, the Havile Kavua. Remember, we have a principle in Safek, in Rov, and in going after Chazakah, that if you live somewhere, if you're Kavua in a place, then you automatically get status. Basically, it's as if you're there. So, and anyone who's Kavua, I mean, you live there, Chol Kavua, it's a half and half. So we should view this as there being a reasonable chance that 1 person left behind is Jewish, in which case you have to be Mifakech et Agal, you have to dig out the wreckage on Shabbat. Kimash, where my Lotzricha, the Parush the Chatzer Acher. It's talking about a case where it wasn't actually where they lived. They all moved from where they were to another Chatzer. Let's say there's an earthquake, right? They hear the earthquake, they run out of their house, they run out into the courtyard, and then the courtyard collapses. So because the people left their house, they lose their chazakah, they lose their kavua, their fixed place. And there, let's say there were 9 people who ran out who were non-Jewish, 1 who was Jewish, 9 of them ran away, 1 of them is left behind under the rubble. You would assume that person's not Jewish, and you wouldn't do anything. Says Shmuel, that's wrong. Don't go after the majority, right? So that's what Shmuel said. I would have thought called the parish Meruba parish, you assume whoever leaves a group is from the majority. And since the majority of this group, 9/10 were non-Jews, this individual is non-Jewish. This is what Shmuel said, that by Pikuach Nefesh, you don't go after a majority, you go after any possible minority that might save a life. Says we're aiming. That's not true. We have another statement of Rabbi Yochanan, we'll see, that this contradicts that. Said Rabbi Yochanan, if you have 9 non-Jews, 1 Jew in 1 courtyard, and the courtyard collapses, right? And 1 of them is trapped behind, then mifakhin. Then you dig down, because that 1 who's left behind might be the Jew. But says Rabbi Yochanan, if it's bechatzar acheret, ein mifakhin. If it's not in the place where they live, meaning if you have 10 people who are running away and they go somewhere else, and then that place collapses, and 1 of them is left behind, you don't dig under it, because you cannot assume that the person who's left behind is Jewish. You have to assume it's a majority. The majority of people are not Jewish in that place, and that's what you go with. You go with the rov. So you see that Rabbi Yochanan specifically says you do go with the rov, and Shmuel says you don't, which of course is not a big problem because Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan could disagree. But the Gemara says, Lo Kashya, we have another explanation. It depends. It depends on whether all of the people left or just some of them left. Meaning, if all of the people left, then basically they established themselves as a new group in the new Chatzer, right? And there you go with the majority. But if only 1 of them or some of them ran away, then you go and you assume that it might have been the one who's Yisrael. So it depends on whether a group left or not a group left. Which says Gemara, Miyam Shmuel Hachi, 3 lines from the bottom, did Shmuel in fact say that you don't go after Rov? That's not. Now we have a Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, Matzah Batino. This is a Mishnah in Machshirin, the second Machshirin. The Mishnah says, this is a fascinating and also very practical halacha, not in common situations, but in relevant situations. The Mishnah says you have, let's say you have an atomic bomb drops on the city. I don't think that's the Mishnah's case, but that's the idea. And after this tremendous war or attack or asteroid, you find the city's destroyed, and you're walking around, and matzaba tinok, you find a child, an orphan, maybe not orphan, you don't know, an abandoned or unattended child, wandering around the city, in dire straits. So the question is this kid Jewish or not Jewish? And then why does it matter? So of course it matters because if the child is Jewish, then we have responsibilities as a community to support the child. If not, we don't. Second of all, it matters for Tuma and Tara possibly. And third of all, it matters for Yuchsin. Is this kid Jewish? Can they marry a Jew or not? Right? Totally unidentified 2-year-old child who can't say anything about where they're from or what they are, and they've been in this tremendous, terrible catastrophe. So says the Mishnah, Matzaba Tinok Mushlach. If you find a kid who's just abandoned basically in the city, Imrov Kuti and Kuti. Well, it depends on the city. If it's a Kuti city, a non-Jewish city, then you assume the kid is non-Jewish. You don't know who they are. You don't know anything about them, right? There's no ways to check. There's no Shema Yisrael or Brit Milah or anything like that. They look the same for whatever reason, or that's how they looked. Then you assume the kid is a Kuti and you treat the child like a non-Jew for all aspects. Imrov Yisrael. If most of the city is Jewish, then you assume the child is Jewish. And so this Mishnah in Machshirin makes it sound like you go after the rove. And says the Mishnah, Tov, if you're there, we're 2 lines from the bottom on Pedal on the bet. If you're Mechza Yisrael, if it's 50-50, you assume the child is Jewish. But you see clearly, unlike what Shmuel said, that you go after rove. Now this is Pikuach Nefesh, right? The question of whether you feed the child, right? You're saving their life. Says the Mishnah, if the child is abandoned in the city and the majority of the city are non-Jews, you assume the child is not Jewish. Says the Gemara, the Amar Rav, we didn't finish. And Rav says, Lo shana al hachioto. That's only true that if it's a rove, non-Jews, that you assume the child is not Jewish, is for the purposes of feeding him. Meaning, if you have a responsibility as a Jewish community to feed, to absorb, to adopt any Jewish child, but not a non-Jewish child. And so if the child's non-Jewish, you don't have to feed the child or support the child. But says Rav, but to give yichus, meaning to say that this child is Jewish and can marry a Jew, if it's a woman, that she can marry a Kohen, things like that, you don't rely on this for yichus, meaning you need better proof than just, I grew up in a town that's mostly Jewish, okay? But either way, the first part's a question on Shmuel. Because according to Shmuel, by Safek Nefashot, you don't go after rove. So if you find one child in a city of 10 million people, and most are non-Jews, according to Shmuel, you should have to assume the child's Jewish for life purposes, for Pikuach Nefesh. Says Shmuel Amar, no. I was talking about Lefakech Lavetagal, right? Shmuel Amar, this is just the end of that statement. I apologize. Rav said it's talking about yichus, and Shmuel said it's talking about lefakech lebetagal, whether or not you have to dig the child out. So this seems to be a contradiction. Why is Shmuel saying that you don't dig the child out? Let's say again, it's a city with 10-1 majority of non-Jews. If you find a child, you assume the child's not Jewish, and if they're stuck under a building, you don't dig them out. But if there's even a chance they're Jewish, then it should be safek nefashot, and it should be done. There's no rove. Says Zimar, ki itmar d'Shmuel Reisha itmar. No, Shmuel was referring to the earlier part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says in Rov Kuti and Kuti that if most of the people in the city are majority is non-Jewish, you assume the child is non-Jewish. That's where Shmuel said, Amar Shmuel, pikuach nefesh eino kain. Shmuel said, no, I disagree with you. Pikuach nefesh, meaning for things that might save a life, like digging out a child or feeding a child, there I disagree. And there, even if there's a small chance that this abandoned child is Jewish, you have to treat it like a Jew, and you have to do b'mechalal Shabbat. Says the Gemara, so then what's the halacha then? It says, if the Mishnah said in Rov Kutiyim Kuti, if the majority of the town is Kutiyim, you treat the child like a Kuti. So according to Shmuel, l'mayochata, right? What's the implication? Shmuel's saying that even if the town is majority non-Jewish, you assume that a child who's there might be Jewish and you're Mechalal Shabbat, and you dig out and you give them food. So what does it mean that you treat him like a non-Jew? In what way? Says Rav Papa, beautiful halacha, right? Crazy halacha. La'achilon nivelot. It's telling you that you can feed the child non-kosher meat, right? So basically, you take this child, you have to feed the child because if they might be Jewish, so you have to save their life. But because most of the people in the city are not Jewish, you can feed them treif, right? So you're on the same child treating them safek like a Jew to save their life. But then when you're mechalel Shabbat and you dig the child out from under the rubble, you feed him a McDonald's sandwich. It's a crazy, crazy image. According to Shmuel, that's how it works. Because halachically, you assume he's not Jewish because the city is mostly not Jewish. So you treat him like a non-Jew in all regards, except in regards to saving his life or her life, which has to be machmir and go with the minority that he or she might be Jewish. Fascinating halacha. Continues the Gemara, 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 lines, 5 lines from the top. In Rov Yisrael, said the Mishnah in Machshirin, if most inhabitants of the city are Jewish, and you find an abandoned child, you assume the child's Jewish, Yisrael. Well, again, what's the practical implication? Because you are certainly going to save the life, even if it wasn't a majority. It says, it's to return the Avedah. Remember that we have, and again, this is halacha, that there's rules about returning an Avedah, the Torah says. We learn in the Gemara in Bava Metzia that only applies to a Jew. By a non-Jew, it's not the same responsibility to return their Avedah. If they lose something, you can just keep it. If it's a kid who comes from, you assume they're Jewish, means you have to return their Avedah. And Mechza Yisrael, and the Mishnah then said if it's 50-50, you also assume the child is Jewish. What's the chiddush there? It's referring to damages. Because remember that in damages, there's a 2-tier system. There's criminal courts, we'll call them, where you have certain rules about what you have to pay when you hurt someone or when someone hurts you. And then there's Jewish courts, where there's very specific rules about tam and muad and chatzi nezek and all of that. None of that applies in a non-Jewish setting, right? So that's the implication. Thinking about, well, what's the case? Let's say I'm a Jew here, I'm an established Jew. My shar scores the shar of this kid who is a Suffolk Jew. So 90 raya v'nishka. What do you mean? I'm not going to pay full damage like you would in non-Jewish court, as opposed to half damage which you would pay in Jewish court, because the kid's got to prove that he's not Jewish in order for me to have to pay that. You can't prove it. So it's the opposite way. The Torah didei, Torah didan. This kid's shar gored my shar, gored my cow. So what does the kid have to pay me? So if he was not Jewish, he'd have to pay me full damage. If he's Jewish, then he reverts to Jewish law, where you only pay as a tam half damage. So what happens is you treat the kid like a Jew. So 90 raya, what happens is, palga yavle, half payment he's got to give because it's clear he was at fault. But irich palga, but the other half, name malay, aiti raya delav yisrael anav v'shakal. He can say, prove that I'm not Jewish. And since you can't prove that I'm not Jewish, you can't collect your other half. If the majority of the people in the town were non-Jewish, then you would go after Rov, and you would say that I don't have to prove you're not Jewish. You are presumably not Jewish because the majority of people are not Jewish, and you've got to pay me the full damages.
Even in a Jewish court, if he goes to a Beit Din, he would get full damages?
Well, Beit Din would say that, because even Beit Din would acknowledge that the rules are different.
But aren't the rules?
It's not based on the Beit Din, it's based on the people involved, right? Good. So again, this is a more of a Bava Metzia question. It's more of a rather uncomfortable question.
Right? No, but I understand. But I mean, they're applying secular law, which would be
again, I call it secular. It's not in halachic terms. We don't think of it as secular law. We think of it as Jewish law and not Jewish law, right? These are mumminous. This is not Hilchot Shabbat.
But I mean, so it would be full damages if he's not Jewish.
Right. So in a non-Jewish law,
that would be in
damage someone you pay.
Court, not in the Beit Din, I think.
Right. Well, I agree. I don't think Beit Din was adjudicated. They might send it, but I assume I'm not 100% sure, but I assume that in Israel, where you had a sovereignty, Jewish courts would also adjudicate non-Jewish rulings. It's not like it's not like today where you have to separate religions, but I'm not sure I have any proof of that. But I don't see why they wouldn't. They would just apply that standard of law, right? There's law that, anyways, sounds very unpleasant.
That's a jurisdictional question. So.
A jurisdictional question. I like that. Okay. Continues the Gemara from the 2 dots, the 10 lines down from Pei and Aleph. This is back to our Mishnah. It said Mishnaf alav mapolet, right? So remember, the Mishnah said, unfortunately, a building collapses. Very practical case. Suffix if the person's there or not there, right? So Mishnah had three sfeikot. Suffix sham, suffix eno sham. Suffix chai, suffix mate. Suffix Yisrael, suffix kuti, right? It says, what do you mean? It's all the sfeikot? You have some of the sfeikot? What is the Mishnah saying? It says the Gemara, what is Micah Amar? What do you mean in the Mishnah? Lo mi ba'ikam. The Mishnah is saying a sort of a literal technique that the Mishnah uses of lo mi ba'i, meaning not only in this case do you do it, but even in another case. What does that mean? Lo mi ba'i suffix husham, suffix enu sham. Not only would you dig on Shabbat if you weren't sure if the person was there even, right? I mean, this is unfortunately the whole case in Florida, right? We have no idea who's in the building, right? So a building collapses.
I think you have the names of the people who live there.
So you don't know if they were there. I mean, some you do, but there are people on that list, and that's why the list changes, because you have a vacation home. I mean, maybe after a few days you can't track someone down, you figure it out. But like, it's hard to know, who was there a minute before it collapsed because you didn't announce it, right? So this is true on a smaller scale. You have a house that collapses. The question is, was anyone home, right? Which is, I think, a very common question. So we don't know the answer, but still you have to dig because there might be someone home. Right? Safek sham usham safek eno sham. There you might think, look, the house collapsed. Now again, maybe not like in Florida, but it might be a case where the door collapsed, basically, right? So if someone was there, they're alive. We just don't know if they're there or not. But there it might make sense to go and rescue them on Shabbat or to pull down the house, because if they're there, right? If they're there, they're alive. That's where that's where you dig on Shabbat. But says the Mishnah, more than that. There, even if there might have been someone there might not have been. But even if there was someone there, they might have died in the accident, right? It's very liable to the bedroom collapse. So then maybe you shouldn't do it because it's essentially two sveikot. Not only that, Lomi boy safik chai safik mate Yisrael. Not only that, it's not only where they're a Jew. Even where right? I have a hotel. The hotel room collapses. I'd say maybe no one survived the collapse. Even if they did, I don't know if it was occupied. Even if it was occupied, I don't know if it was a Jew or non-Jew. It doesn't matter. Despite all of the uncertainty, the fact is that there's a possibility that there's a Jewish person there and you could save their life. You're Mechalel Shabbat to dig it out. Said the Mishnah then, Matzu Chai, that you would continue digging. The Fakhi. This halacha is really, to me, is everything I do. It's 98% of my medical Jewish halachic practice. So this one line. Matzu Chai, if you find the person alive, you dig the person out. It says where Matzu Chai, Pshita, of course. What do you mean? You're digging this house to find a live person. You find a live person, you're allowed to keep digging to rescue them. Of course you can. It says the Chiddush is that you find them and they're dying. The person is crushed. They're not going to live, right? But if you undig them, they'll have a couple more hours of life. Then afilo chaye sha'a, even if you know for sure they're going to die. This is really how you define chaye sha'a. It's literally mean hours. What's the time frame? But even where you're digging out, you find the person, they're alive. Right? If they're dead, you can't continue for that person. But if they're alive, you can continue even if they've been injured and you know they're going to die. But by digging out, you can give them extra time, chaye sha'a, hours, is literally what it means, life of hours, then you're allowed to keep digging and being Mechalel Shabbat, which is, again, fascinating. How you define chaye sha'a is really, really crazy, right? Because meaning, what are you Mechalel Shabbat for someone to give them a little bit more time? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's not only just giving them more time, but like, at least they feel like, at least there's somebody with them maybe when they're.
So, okay, I mean, there are questions like, what about comfort? What if it's not time, but you're giving them more comfort by giving them, I agree. How you define chaye sha'a, of course, is you can see why it would be very, very difficult to give any kind of consistent definition because it depends so much on the circumstance. But clearly, all our Mishnah is saying is that you're Mechalel Shabbat for chaye sha'a. There's no doubt about that, which again is hugely significant. Continue the Mishnah. Imate yanichu, but if he's dead, you're digging, you find a dead body, you leave it. What would you do? I mean, of course you'd leave it. It's Shabbos, the person's dead. Well, it's telling you, even though Yehuda ben Lakish, the Tanya, if you remember in Shabbos, we had a fascinating ruling, which is, right? Let's say you have a fire that comes out and there's a dead body in the house. You can put out a fire to save a person, but you can't put out a fire. You can't take out the mate, which is muksa, right? Person's dead. You can't carry the mate, touch them, and carry them out of the house to prevent them from getting burned, which you want to do because you want to bury the person, right? But you're not allowed to, says the Tosefta. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish, I disagree. Shamati, I heard from my teachers, right? That you can carry out a mate that to prevent it from being burned on Shabbos. So you might think the same thing is true by a gal, that in order to protect a dead body, you can keep digging to take the body out so it doesn't get crushed, so it doesn't get destroyed. Says the Gemara, that's the Chiddush. Afila Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish lo ka'amar ela mitoch she'adam bahul al meito. The reason that Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish permitted that on Shabbos with fire, it's all Shabbos, but with the fire, is because we know that a person is terribly distressed if they at the prospect of their loved one who's dead being burned. And so we're worried that if they see this, what they're going to do is they're going to get, throw Shabbos to the wind. And ilo sharitle, if you don't permit them to be over muktzah, to carry out the body, they're going to put out the fire. And so you allow them to be mechalel Shabbat midrabanan to prevent midoraita. Amohacha, here by the gal, what are you worried about? Ilo sharitle, my itle lemeva, right? If you tell the person you can't take out your dead body on Shabbos, and the person is terribly sad. Like, what do you mean the house is going to collapse further? I want to protect them. What are they going to do? They'll go take it out, right? But that's only a drabanan anyways, because it's only muksa. And so you don't need to permit them to do a drabanan to prevent them from doing a doraita. You just say to them, you can't do the drabanan. And if the person is so distressed that they do it anyways, then they'll be mechalel drabanan, which is not good, but obviously you're not saving anything by allowing them to do it. So that is Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish's point. Tanu Rabbanan. Now this next line is a line which is not as involved in what I do, but from medical ethics, this is like, if you've ever gone to a medical ethics seminar, they start the Gemara right here. It should be a sign, a big line. Tanu Rabbanan. Because this question is about how do we define brain death. This is the Gemara that forms the basis of it.
Yeah.
Okay? So again, I don't think you're going to walk out of this Gemara with a way to resolve the arguments between the current contemporary and recently contemporary rabbis. But this is the Gemara that is used as a text case. There's a lot of other Gemaras that inform it. But this is the question. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita, we're around 2/3 of the way down, maybe not even that. Ad hechan hu bodek. When you're digging through, again, here's the case. You have a collapsed building. You're using heavy machinery on Shabbos, whatever the equivalent is. In Mechalel Shabbat, to dig out the building. Said our Mishnah, if you find the person alive, you keep excavating, even if they're going to die, because Chayei Shah. If you find the person dead, you stop. Again, assuming you know there's no one else in the building, right? Ask the Braita, what does it mean that you find them alive and dead? How do you determine whether a person's alive or dead? Had hechan hu bodek. Where do you check to determine death or living? Like what you look at the fingers, if they're blue, you look. How do you define death? This is exactly the question that everyone wants to get the answer to. So says the Braita, ad chotmo. You go until you check the person's nose, meaning you look for breathing, right? So they would check, they put a mirror, they put feathers under the nose to look for any kind of, you listen, you look for any kind of breathing. If a person's not breathing, then they're dead. Okay, now don't stop there. But that's the first language in the Braita. Ad chotmo, until their nose, and this is how we paskin. And just again, we're going to read the Gemara. So this forms the basis of the opinions of the whole organ donation and all of those things, which I'm not that familiar with, to be honest. But that basically that if a person's not breathing, what we call brain death, their brainstem doesn't work, then even if their heart's beating, they're dead. That's how I'm reading it. That's not how most people read it, to be honest with you. But we'll get there. So ad chotmo. Yesh omrim, some say ad libo. No, you got to keep going to the heart. Now again, the simplest reading, which again is very much not absorbed by most achronim, the simplest reading is that if, as the Tanna Kama, the first opinion is, if they're breathing or not breathing defines death. And then the Yesh Omrim is, no, even if they're not breathing, you got to go check the heart. Because sometimes you could be not breathing, but your heart's still beating. So you have to go to the heart. Ad libo.
Is that true?
is that your heart can beat when you're not breathing, sure. I mean, not for long, but yeah,
Right.
for an hour.
Really?
Well, yeah, maybe not a day or an hour, but a few minutes, yeah. I mean, same, the heart's a muscle, right? So muscles
I understand.
keep going. Yeah, you can have fluttering of the heart. And like when people drown, for example, they stop breathing, and as long as their heart's still going, they'll start breathing again.
No, I understand, of course. Yeah.
So, but of course,
Ellie,
contemporaneously, it's an issue because you put people on a ventilator, right? So people are not breathing. They have no brainstem reflexes. They cannot breathe independently. You breathe for them. Their hearts can keep going for years.
Yeah, no, I
But long
Ellie,
time.
are,
Yeah.
are you aware of any discussion about resuscitation, the possibility of resuscitation, even if a person's breathing or even heart has stopped, after for a short time?
You mean whether you have to resuscitate?
No, so you find somebody and he's not breathing and there's no pulse. So, I just finished lifeguard recertification.
Yeah.
So what you do is you start CPR, right?
Right.
But I don't think the Gemara had this concept of CPR.
And to be honest, I don't know if the Gemara did, but I'm sure they you bang the person around. They probably didn't understand that you could push the heart to the chest. But
Yeah.
I mean, but because you find people all the time who sort of seem to stop breathing. Again, what are your tools for stopping breathing, right? It's not that sophisticated. You put a feather under their nose, you might not see anything, but certainly you can stop breathing for 30 seconds. You could have apnea, right? And
Yeah.
then you start breathing again. So I'm not sure how long they would check for. Is that the question?
Well, this is a scenario. You're digging for somebody, you find them, and then they say, it sounds like, well, if you've uncovered the head and there's no breathing, right? Then you have to stop chilul Shabbos. But on the other hand, it seems like with
Correct.
current
The Gemara. Most Achronim don't understand the Gemara that way, but that's how I read it to me, and that's how simple reading is, right? Is that you go to the nose if you're not breathing, and this is really ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, I wouldn't rely on me or this, but this is what Rabbi Tendler relied on, right?
From your medical ethics conferences.
Yeah, I mean, this is, if you brain death, that by definition means, or we don't know what it means, right? That's the debate. But what we call brain death in most hospitals is that you have no spontaneous breathing or central, whatever it's called, spinal brain canal. I'm missing the term there. Anyways, the central part of the brain stem. Thank you, brain stem reflexes, right? And the heart could certainly be beating, right? Either on its own. If you give oxygen artificially, the heart will keep going, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's read the Gemara because it's not going to be very clear, but let's read it and we'll try to get what we can. Some say you go till the heart. Now, badaku matzah yonim meitim. Now, again, this is a side point. We'll get back to this kavua time of death. So we'll hold on a second. Continues the Braita though. Badaku matzah yonim meitim. Let's say you're digging, right? You're digging down again. Miami's unfortunately a terribly relevant case. You dig down, you find all the people on the top floors are dead, right? On Shabbos. Lo Yomar, you shouldn't say, well, like that the ones below it are for sure dead. If the top floors are dead, then if you're lower down, you're for sure dead, and we should stop. You could keep going. Because there have been circumstances where right? There's times where the tachtonim are, people further down are able to survive. Let's say their air pockets, whatever it may be. Now, let's say that the machloket as to whether when you check for life, you check until the nose for breathing, or you check until the heart for a heartbeat is related to the following machloket tanaim. The Tanya, mehechan avlad notzar. Where is the fetus created from? Right? This is a debate among the Tanaim here. Where, it sounds like Gadata, right? Where is the fetus created from in the body? Mirosho. The fetus is started from the head. That's not very well. It's not really clear, to be honest with you. Shenemar, and that's based on a pasuk of Mime'ei imi ata gozi. From my mother's womb, I was gozi. And what does gozi refer to? The Omer, another pasuk says, gizi nizrich lashlichi. A nazir should gizi. They should shear their head. So gizi referring to the head. So Tehillim is saying, I was born from my mother from my head, basically. My head started. So that's, if you say head, then of course that's like the nose, meaning the central thing is breathing. They understood that breathing was controlled by the brain, not by the lungs, right? The lungs are just the tool for breathing. Abba Shal says in the Braita in Sota, mitiburo, that an infant is created from their belly button, which seems pretty logical given that That's what the Impolika says. And they basically spread out. Again, it's not quite that way either, but that a fetus starts from the middle and they get spread out. I don't think a obstetrician would agree with exactly that description, but that's how Abba Shaul envisioned it. And there maybe you're referring to the heart, you're referring to the organs. Says, well, that's not really the same thing. Don't bring that Agadata to our Gemara. Abba Shaul may not be saying that life depends on the middle, meaning on the heart. Abba Shaul may agree, and this is probably why we paskin this way, that life is based on breathing. But that maybe for all things you're created from the middle. It makes sense when you create something, you start in the middle and you branch out. You don't start on one end and create to the other side. Even Rabbi Shaul would probably admit, and again, this is why we paskin this way, the ikar chiyuta ba'apehu, that the ikar of life is in breathing. Dichtiv kol asher nishmat ruach chaim ba'apo, that all life, which is pretty clear pasuk, right, in Noach, everything that had nishmat ruach chaim ba'apav, and right, God saving from the flood, anything that has the spirit of the ruach of God in its nose, in its breathing. And so that you see that breathing really is essential. Says Rav Papa, Mamar Rav Papa, machloket mimata lemala. Wait a second. The machloket, this is where it gets very confusing. The machloket is when you're going from below to above, right? Meaning, where you start from the legs, you uncover the body. The machloket is, do you have to keep going to the nose? Meaning, when the Yeshomim say that it's the heart, all they meant to say was, again, this is how I'm reading it. Again, there's a huge debate about whether to read it this way, but this is certainly the simple way, is that if you're digging from the feet up and you find the heart and it's not beating, you can be kovea deaf, according to that Yeshomim. And you stop, you don't keep digging. According to the first opinion, you have to look at the nose, meaning you have to keep digging until you get to the head, so you can establish whether the person is breathing or not. You can't just rely on the heart not beating. Of course, that's very intelligent because certainly without an ultrasound, the heart could be beating very faintly, or the heart could have stopped very momentarily. But you don't have exact tools to determine whether it's the pulse. So just because you feel the heart and you don't feel it, or you even feel the pulse, it's not enough. You have to go for breathing. But aval mimala lemata. But if you go from above to below, kivan debadikle ad chotmo shuv eno tzarich. Everybody agrees. Like nobody agrees, but it says in where everybody agrees that if you're going from top down, meaning you start from the head, you uncover the head and you get to the nose and you find no sign of breathing beyond all doubt, or whatever doubt, again, the Gemara doesn't give techniques. Beyond all doubt, there's no breathing, then kivan debadle chotmo shuv eno tzarich dichtiv kol asher nishmat ruach chaim ba'apiv. That's what defines life, the breathing. The kfar harya. Well, before we go there. So this Gemara, of course, sounds very, very, very much like it is defining death as just breathing, in which case the brainstem death, however you define that, meaning if a person couldn't spontaneously breathe, but they're being fed by a machine, but even if their heart's going and their organs are perfect, they're considered dead, and you could unhook the machine and organ donation and all the things that we are practically relevant for. Of course, many Achronim disagree. And one of the ways they explain this Gemara, which again, very hard, is that when you check the head, you also look for the pulse in the neck. And all the Gemara is saying is that you have to look for breathing and a pulse in the carotids or somewhere up there. You don't have to uncover the heart to look for a pulse in the heart. If there's no breathing and no pulse in the carotids, then you could be kovea deaf. Again, very much not the pashtus of the Gemara, but it's as I said, in every medical ethics course, this Gemara is a huge, and of course people have commented for many generations on this and the relevance. But Kfar, the last narrow line, Kfar Haya Rabbi Yishmael, there was a story with Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who were mahalchin b'derech. They were, all these rabbis were going on a tiyul, going somewhere. The Levi Haseder, we don't know exactly who that is, but it sounds like he's a person who was Misader, who organized learning. So he was in charge of defining all the Brightot and stuff. Levi HaSeder and Rabbi Yishmael ben Osher and Elazar ben Azariah malchin achreihem. They were walking behind them. Nish'ala she'ela zu b'fneihem. They asked the following question: Minayin lepikuach nefesh shedochet Shabbat. Right? When you're on the road, these are the kind of questions you want to ask, right? These fundamental, deep questions where everybody assumes the case. even in those days, everybody knows that Pikuach Nefesh is Doches Shabbat. How do we know that? What's the source to tell you that Pikuach Nefesh is Doches Shabbat? The perfect question to ask on a trip when you're with these people, right? So Rabbi Yishmael answered first, and he said, it says, Im b'machteret yimatzeh ganav, right? The very famous case of Baba Machteret, which we have in Sanhedrin. If a person is digging in a channel, in a tunnel, and getting to break into your house, you can kill that person, and you're not chayiv mita, right? So now, right? This person digging in your house, you don't know if he came to kill you. You don't know if he came just to steal money, but you can kill them. Shvichut damin mitamei ta'aretz. We know how bad shvichut damin is. It's mitamei ta'aretz. It's gorem l'shchina shetistalek miYisrael. It causes God to leave Israel, but still you can kill the person. Nitan latzilo b'nafsho, even though it's a safek. So kal v'chomer b'pikuach nefesh. Certainly, pikuach nefesh dochet Shabbat. If you can be mechalel, you can kill a person who's coming to your house with possible intentions to harm you, then certainly, because they might be coming to harm you, even so, because certainly you can be mechalel Shabbat for pikuach nefesh. Then Rabbi Akiva said, I got another proof. The Amar, it says, V'chi yazid ish al re'eyo l'hargo b'mirma. Right? It says if a person on purpose goes to kill another person or kills another person with trickery, Pasuk says in Mishpatim, take that person off of my altar to kill them. Now, says the Gemara, says Rabbi Akiva, what's the drasha from this pasuk? It says from me'im, if they're next to my mizbeach, below me'al mizbechi, not if they're actually standing on the mizbeach and serving. Now that's bizarre. So what if they're not? What do you mean you don't take them if they're standing on the mizbeach? So says Rabba Bar Barchan Amr Yochanan, Lo Shana al Hamit. We're only talking about if you're going to take the person to kill them, meaning the person who's a Kohen, presumably, he's on the Mizbeach, is already been determined to be a murderer. He's going to be killed. Aval, if the purpose of bringing the person is lahachyot, is to make them live, meaning to go to court and to say, let's say I'm a Kohen, I'm not, and I'm saying to the Mizbeach, but I might have proof that Joe didn't actually kill Rachel when they said he did, then you would drag me off the Mizbeach even in the middle of the service to go and report to Beit Din to save a life, right? So aval hachiyot on the top line of Pei Hamabet, but to keep a person alive, afilu me'al mizbechi, you even take a person off of the altar. This is where clearly, ma'azeh. Now, if I say I know something about this case, it doesn't mean Beis Din is going to listen to me, right? They have to listen to my testimony. It's unknown for sure whether what I'm about to say is going to be true. And avodah is doches Shabbat. Avodah is something that is doches Shabbat. When you do avodah in Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat. So even though avodah is doches Shabbat, you are doche avodah to go save a life. Kal v'chomer can be doches Shabbat, right? We transfer that. Kal v'chomer lepikuach nefesh doche Shabbat. This is the kind of Rabbi Akiva statement, right? They're very brilliant, but somewhat convoluted. Nene Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, the third sage walking, said, I have a proof from Mila. Uma Mila, Brit Mila. Mila is only one organ in the body. It's one of 248 Ivarim in a person, and you can be Dochesh Shabbat to fix that organ. So Kal v'chomer the Chol Gufo. Certainly, if you want to save a whole person, that you're Dochesh Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yossi Yehuda said, I have a proof. It says, Et Shabtutai Tishmoru. You should protect my Shabbat. That's the prohibition of doing Melacha on Shabbat. Yachol Lekol, you might think, under all circumstances, keep Shabbat, come hell or high water, come death or not. Kalmalomer, ach, doesn't say Et Shabtutai Tishmoru. It says, but, ach, Et Shabtutai Tishmoru. And ach always means Lechalek, to separate, meaning to quantify, to limit. Ach chalak. Ach always tells you to provide limitations on the rule. And the limitation is you should always keep Shabbat, except when there's limitations. When? So I'm telling you, it's when it's pikuach nefesh. Rabbi Yonatan ben Yosef Omer, who's also an interesting person. It says, Ki kodesh hi lachem. I love this drasha. Shabbos is kodesh for you. It's masru b'yedchem. He masru b'yedchem. Shabbos is given to you. Shabbos is a tool of people. Below atem masru b'yadam. But your life is not given over to Shabbat. meaning you control, you have more power in Shabbat. And if there's a conflict between Shabbat and your life, you go with your life, not Shabbat. So that's how you know Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, it says, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbat. You should observe Shabbat. And that's telling you, Amru Torah, that you should think about the preservation of Shabbat in a global sense, not in a limited sense. Meaning, again, this is very, very frequently quoted, the last narrow line, Chilel alav Shabbat achat, you could be mechalel for a person one Shabbat, kadesh yishmar Shabbatot harbeh, so that in the future, in their life, they can observe many Shabbatot. Amr Rabbi Yehuda Amr Shmuel, again, this was obviously a very, very impactful trip, and this was reported over history, all these Tanaim, and they're proofs that you can be mechalel Shabbat. Says Rabbi Yehuda Amr Shmuel a couple generations later, Ihavi hatam, if I was there, Havi Amina, I would have said something that's better than all of them. It's a pretty bold thing to say. Didi adifa miditchu. What is my proof? The Torah says v'chai bahem, v'lo shi'amut bahem. Torah says you have mitzvot of the Torah to live with, not to kill yourself for. If you're dying and Shabbat, if someone's dying, and it's Shabbat and observing Shabbat would mean they would die, you're supposed to not follow that mitzvah because the overriding theme is v'chai bahem. Amar Rava, says Rava, you know what? The kulo itle pircha, all of these proofs can be ruined, right? Can be uprooted, except for Shmuel, right? Except for this Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The bar mi de Shmuel, the letle pircha. What's the pircha? The Rabbi Shmuel who proved it from Baba Machteret, Damakid Rava. Remember the next line in the Gemara in Sanhedrin is that we know that he's for sure going to kill you. It's not that it's a suffix whether he's going to kill you, because as Rava said, Dama Rava, my time of the Machteret. Why are you allowed to kill the person coming into your house to rob you? Because chazakah, because we know that the robber knows that a person's not going to just let you take their money and they're going to defend themselves. The robber, the borrower knows you're going to confront him and try to prevent the person from stealing your jewelry. And so the person who's robbing says, if he comes, I'm going to have to kill him because I'm going to have to defend myself. And therefore, basically, you're going in with a determination to kill the person. And that's why he can kill you, because the HaTorah Amra, and because the Torah says, but not necessarily that you can, on a safek, be mechalel in a mitzvah in the Torah. The Ashkechan Vadai, right? There you only see it's where your Vadai, safek minala, doesn't tell you safek. Rabbi Akiva, remember, said, oh, the proof is because they're going to take you off the Mizbeach to go and verify whether a person should not be killed. So you're going safek to save a life because Beit Din might not listen to your testimony. Says Gemara, that's not true. Maybe they go to the Mizbeach and they interrogate you. And they do like a pre-trial hearing to make sure that you're going to be right. And if you're right, that's where they take you off. Like Abaye said. And in fact, that's what Abaye said in Sanhedrin. Where my Rabbi Kiva Nami Damukid Abaye. Damar Abaye, as Abaye said, Masrina le Zuga Drabanan le Daim Mamash B'Dvaravim Lo. Like that they send a couple of Rabbanan, a couple of scholars to see if what you're saying is plausible. So again, Ashkechan Vadai, you see that only that you go and you're Mechalel Avodah if you for sure can save a life. But Safek Minalan, you don't find Safek. The Kula, and if all the proofs that we brought, you could say Ashkechan Vadai Safek Minalan, right? And you could always say that wherever the Torah says that you are Mechalel Shabbat, all of those cases might be where it's a Vadai. But none of them prove that even on Safek, you are Mechalel Shabbat. Only Shmuel. Shmuel says the overriding theme is living with them. Anything that can lead to life, even if it's not guaranteed, would be permitted on Shabbos. Shmuel, Vadai letle pircha. But what Shmuel said, there is no pircha. There, and you listen to, or take out the word Vadai, Shmuel letle pircha. Amar Ravina, the Tamer of Nachman Yitzchak, this is the famous Talmudic saying, or probably not Talmudic, but famous popular saying, Tava chada pilpalta charifa imala tzana dekari. Sometimes, one small, what's called hot pepper, it gives more flavor and taste than a whole basket full of tsani is like pumpkins, I think, right, or gourds. So meaning you could have the elders who are, the real strong ones, I don't know how you call them, the gourds, the meat of the matter, but it just takes one, new up and coming pilpal charifta to prove something sometimes that's better than all of them. So that's where we go with Shmuel, and Shmuel's proof is adopted, of course, and that's why you can be Mechalel Shabbat. Should we read the Mishnah, Dover? You want to do it tomorrow?
No.
What?
We do the Mishnah tomorrow, I think.
All the same to me.
What's your vote, Hanan?
I like to,
Do it tomorrow. I think it'll
yeah, do it
very
tomorrow.
easy.
I can't retain it, you know.
Fair
I have to
enough.
look
Okay.
at it
Yeah,
again.
this was I went very quickly, but anyways, you get a break on Kechet. The last day is only half a day. So we'll
Yeah,
start tomorrow. But yes, this is, as I said, this stuff is really both for the first points of, you know, Safek of Chaye Sha'ah, then of course the where your Kovea death is a fundamental and really, really critical and practical daf.
This comes up in other Gemaras too, right? This is not the only
It's
place.
referenced elsewhere. No, there's definitely references in Tumah more than anything, because you talk in Tumah about how do you decide when a person's tameh. Of course, that's halach. That's what the rabbis really wanted to talk about.
Exactly, that's what they really care about.
So
Yeah.
there's a Gemara about where if you cut off the head of a person, it's a Mishnah, I think, right? Is the body and the body's still moving? Is the body tameh? Like these kind of questions, which are relevant if you assume that brain death is like cutting off the head of a person. But and everyone agrees to that. Everybody. So let me just be very clear. Even those who disagree about how some are kovea brain death would say that if you cut off the head of a person, even if the heart's still pumping, which it probably could for, I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute, maybe more, that body is not tameh. I'm sorry, is tameh. It's a tumat mate because it's dead. So the question, of course, is just if we define breathing as cessation of brainstem activity or death, is that enough? And our Gemara still very much seems to support that it is, but halachically it was not understood that way for a very long time. You know, the other detail, I'll just throw it out there, which again, not halacha, is that the question is this Gemara really relevant? Because this Gemara is talking about a person who's under a mapola, who fell under a house, right? You dig them up and you find that they're not breathing. You have to assume that they've been there for a long time and that what you're seeing is long term, right? The questions that comes up in the hospital is if a person has a heart attack or a stroke and 45 seconds later, not always, meaning it's not 40, it's a couple minutes. So there's a chance that it's not the same thing, right? That if a person's not breathing, but it's because they had a stroke and it was very sudden, that it's not, you don't view it the same way as a person's underneath the building, which might have been there for a long period of time. So just to be clear, you could find differences.
Right. I mean, you assume that the person hasn't been breathing for minutes, you know, for many minutes. I mean, well, you can't assume that, but I mean,
that's the question is, what can you assume, right? So that's where halachically, the rabbis do assume things, but that's where it gets very controversial.
That's a good point.
Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.